And I'm delighted, especially delighted today, that because you have tuned in. And just a reminder, as always, that if you want to ask the guest a question, all you do is click that little question mark that's on the lower left-hand side of the chat box. Because on today's Boost, we're looking for insight on the really big questions about the pandemic. Are scientists any closer to a successful COVID-19 vaccine? And until then, what are we supposed to do to protect ourselves and our loved ones this winter? So joining us today is a vaccine expert, Dr. Sarah Schlesinger Hirschfeld. Dr. Schlesinger is an associate professor of clinical investigation at the Rockefeller University, and she's the chair of the Institutional Review Board and senior attending physician at the Rockefeller University Hospital. We are so fortunate to have her today. I bet she's the most wanted guest anywhere these days. Welcome, Sarah.
Adrienne, thank you so much. I'm just delighted to be here with our community. What a moment we're in. Exactly. The pandemic is raging. We are fully now in the either second or third wave, depending on where you are, that was promised, after the lull for the summer. This virus, COVID-19, actually, the disease is COVID-19. The virus is called SARS-CoV-2, and it's a winter virus. It likes cold, it likes dry, and the warm summer weather was a bit of a protectant, but now that's done. And we're all inside and close together and breathing the same air. And so here in the US, and I apologize for those of you who are outside of the US, the statistics that I'm familiar with, because this is where I am, are here for the United States. We've had over 9 million infections that have recorded, and there are many, many more that haven't been recorded. And now, and these are the statistics from this morning, nearly 250,000 people have passed away. And that is, absolutely tragic. My husband reminded me of a statistic that we both heard last night, that more nurses have died of COVID than died in World War I.
Oh, dear
So
Lord.
it is just a horror. And we're just at the very beginning. We're at the upslope of that second or third wave.
Are you saying that could get worse? It's going to get worse?
It will get worse. It will get worse, almost certainly. The good news is we can still impact that. I live in New York City, and as many of you know, New York was the epicenter of the pandemic. It was horrible here. We had the highest infection rates of any place in the United States. And using good old public health measures, we now have still among the lowest. The infection rates here are below 2%, which is really, again, I don't mean to diminish it for those who are sick and dying. It's horrible, but it's a completely different thing than the 25% infection rates that are occurring elsewhere in the United States.
Sure. So, you just said some basic core public health things. What are you speaking of? That brought things down in New York.
So, let me kind of go over where things are. Unfortunately, Adrienne, I don't know if it's your internet or mine, you got a little bit garbled, but let me kind of go over where things are in terms of, I've just told you about the pandemic, unfortunately, but the good news is, what I'm optimistic about is, science is going to save us. There are many promising vaccines on the horizon, as well as several treatments that are really good. The other thing that's really optimistic is, even though the pandemic is raging again, my colleagues, the physicians in the hospitals, really know what to do much, much better. They're much more skilled, and they have much more experience in taking care of people with this disease. And there are approved drugs. There are 2 approved drugs: remdesivir, which is an antiviral drug developed by Gilead, and then steroids, dexamethasone, which is a common treatment for a lot of things. And both of those have been demonstrated and are approved to treat COVID here in the United States. So neither of those were available, and we didn't know if they worked earlier in the pandemic. So that's also having a great impact on the pandemic now. But in the future, the things that I think, as Adrienne mentioned, I've spent my life developing antiviral vaccines, primarily for HIV. And though I've developed vaccines, I'm fundamentally an immunologist, and I think about the immune side of the equation. And there are three different kinds of interventions that involve the immune system that have been used. And I'd sort of like to clarify what they are and how
Please,
they differ. So the
please.
first one is convalescent plasma. This is the oldest technology. It's tried and true. I don't know how many of you know the story of Balto, the sled dog that saved the children of Nome. He
Yeah.
in his heroism is memorialized in the Iditarod sled race. So have you heard of the Iditarod dog sled race? It goes
Yes,
from Anchorage to Nome. And that's because it retraces the steps that Balto and his team took, I believe it was in 1935, carrying diphtheria antitoxin, which is a version, it's slightly different, but it's like convalescent plasma to save the children of Nome from diphtheria. And spoiler alert for those of you who don't know the story, he made it. And there's a wonderful statue of him right here in Central Park. So I find that very inspiring. But convalescent plasma was also used in the 1918 flu pandemic. People who have recovered from a disease have antibodies. They've made a good immune response, you hope, and their blood can be given to somebody who's ill, particularly people who are very seriously ill, who aren't mounting a good immune response, and it can really turn their clinical course around. In Ebola in Africa, they used whole blood because they didn't have the ability to separate out plasma, which is the part of the blood that doesn't contain the cells. So what's been done here, you may have seen on television, people who've recovered go and they donate, they get back their cells, so they haven't lost any blood, and they donate their plasma. Now, that's great, but it's a very limited resource. Each donation is only really enough for 3 doses, and you don't know if the person made a good response. Only a certain percentage of people make a good response. So there's a certain amount of luck of the draw. Are you going to get the plasma from somebody who has good antibodies or not? So that's another variable. It's not standard. It's quite limited. It's an emergency thing to do, and it was the right thing to do. And, people who've complained about the FDA approving it for emergent use, I think that frankly, they're wrong. I think it was, you use what you have, and this is what we had. But the Regeneron antibodies that you talked about, they are in concept the same idea. You're providing an antibody to a person who doesn't have one, but technologically, they're 3 logs better. They are antibodies that are made synthetically in a laboratory using the DNA sequence that comes from somebody who made a super good response.
Got it.
So my colleagues at Regeneron, and frankly, some of my colleagues at the Rockefeller have done the same thing. J&J has one. They draw blood from people who've recovered. They screen for those who've responded well and make good, or what are called neutralizing. Those are antibodies that kill the virus. They isolate those B cells, and then they use the sequence, just the information. So nothing from another person is being transfused into patient to make a synthetic antibody. So they really are good. The clinical trials haven't ended yet, so there's still the jury is still out. But I think that the evidence to date is very promising, and conceptually, I would put my money on those. I always say to my husband, God forbid anybody gets sick, we're going to be trying to get those. But the problem with those antibodies is they're hard to make. I mean, they can be made at pharmaceutical scale, but to make the tens or hundreds of millions of doses you would need to treat everybody around the world isn't feasible, because they are, as I say, hard to make. But they are available. I mean, not available commercially, but they will be quite soon, and they've been made. And Regeneron and the other companies that are working on them are working at scaling up to make enough to meet the needs of the world. So
That's good.
I'm very optimistic about those. They have been used to treat people who are sick, and they work well. They are also being tested to prevent infection. So they give you what you would make a good immune response if you'd had a vaccine, but it doesn't last, or it may last at most 6 months. It's not, your body isn't making the response, it's given to you. But if you were a nursing home patient, or if you were a healthcare worker, one of those nurses who I mentioned, they are also being tested to prevent disease in those populations. And I'm very optimistic about that.
Wow.
The vaccine is the holy grail. The vaccine, any vaccine, is something that is given to a human being or an animal, but in our case, a human being, to stimulate our own immune system to make a response, basically to fool the immune system into thinking that it's seen the organism before. The beauty of our immune system, okay, the thing that has kept me tantalized for over 40 years is that it has memory, right? So there's a great study of yellow fever from Norfolk, Virginia. So, and I may have these dates a little off, but in 1998, there was an epidemic and it came back in the 30s. And the people who had been exposed in 1998 were still protected. So that means that their immune systems had remembered for all of those years.
Wow.
And that's, yeah, exactly. It's kind of amazing, right? Amazing. And so a good vaccine does the same thing. Now, making a good vaccine is easier said than done, but we're very fortunate, unlike HIV, which is the virus, which I've worked to develop a vaccine for virtually my whole professional life. HIV is a very bad vaccine target for a whole bunch of reasons. And I'm not going to go into them now, but if you ever want to chat about it another time, I can talk about that forever.
I would love to.
Okay. I don't know.
I really would.
You might rue saying that, but I appreciate it.
No, I don't think so. I don't think so.
But
I'm beyond fascinated.
But the wonderful thing about the SARS-CoV-2 virus, if there is a wonderful thing, is that it is a good vaccine target. And that's for a variety of reasons. It's stable, though it mutates a little bit. It doesn't change the way influenza or HIV does. It has proteins on its surface that remain relatively stable. And our immune system makes a good response to it and then clears it. So the real vaccine challenge, I'm just about to tell you. So the real vaccine challenges, HIV, TB, and malaria, those are infections that you get and they stay in your body in natural infection. You don't clear them. That viral infections like influenza, measles, mumps, rubella, those that we have really good vaccines for, smallpox, yellow fever, those are acute viral infections. You get them, you mount an immune response, you clear the virus, it goes away, and your body remembers. And we're very fortunate that COVID or SARS-CoV-2 is in that latter category because, there's a lot of wonderful intervention for HIV. For those of us who are older and remember, the HIV epidemic has been transformed, but not by a vaccine, right? By testing, by voluntary testing, and by treatment, and a whole bunch of behavioral things, but not by a vaccine. We're still struggling and we need a vaccine for HIV. I mean, my mentor.
I have to, can I just stop you for 1 minute?
Please, of course.
I know I'm going off the page here, but what do you
It's quite
say
all
to
right.
people who are totally anti-vax, who post about it and write about it and shame about it? Just as an expert who has no skin in the game other than a lifelong career of this, what do you say?
Well, that is another conversation we could have with the community.
All
It's a real
right.
challenge because when I was younger and less patient, I got my back up because it absolutely appalls me because vaccines work beautifully. They are the miracle of modern medicine. One of the things that we neglected to put into my bio is I'm the third generation of women physicians in my family. My grandmother was a physician and my aunt is a physician.
Wow.
My grandmother graduated from Tufts Medical School, Anna Merkin Schlesinger, in 1923. 1923 is before there's antibiotics. It's before there's. And when I was a little girl, she would tell me about watching children die of diphtheria, which one might argue whether that was appropriate conversation to be having, but it worked for both of us. And diphtheria was you can go to cemeteries and you can see a whole family of children, who passed away within the same, week. Nobody, that doesn't happen anymore.
Okay,
We don't
Sarah,
notice.
We're going to do
We
this.
don't notice what doesn't happen, and the vaccines protect us. People who don't get vaccines, their families are riding on the herd immunity of our families who do get vaccines. So I feel like it's really misguided, but I've learned over the years that you can't, get your back up with people because you can feel very self-righteous, but it doesn't help. So I think
also,
that,
I mean, there is a commandment. There's a Jewish commandment not to speak where you won't be heard either. My chat is blowing up with people asking questions. So we're going to pause
Let's
on
go.
all this for 1 minute. Okay, so let's just go through them one after the other. Super important question. Do you recommend putting off non-urgent procedures such as colonoscopies or mammograms during this time?
Yes, I do.
Boy,
I
I feel better.
absolutely do. I have to tell you, I realize I have the health commissioner saying it's safe to go back for your screening procedures. I I disagree. You know, the healthcare system is an industry, and in that lull, there were a lot of hospitals that weren't, keeping up whatever their quotas.
Right.
As of now, I believe, I mean, there is a vaccine. There are two vaccines that are already in vials where there are late phase clinical trials and where you're just awaiting the data. And so I think it's going to be a matter of months. And my own view is I intend to wait till after this third or second wave, depending on where you are, is over, to do anything like that, unless it's an emergency. If it's an emergency, for instance, I'm not going to the dentist to get my teeth cleaned. My best friend's husband broke his tooth and he can't eat. He has to go to the dentist tomorrow.
Right.
If you need to do something, yes, but for a screening procedure, I would wait.
I'm so glad I asked you. Okay, now somebody's saying, give me some practical tips moving forward, starting today.
Okay, so you set me up. So the reason that I do this, other than I love to talk about all the immunology and the virology, is because there are things we can do, and they are things that work. So there are what we call the core four, and I'm not going to do them in order because the last one is mask wearing, which is by far the most important and the most effective. So the first one is washing your hands, okay? Good hand washing. Every time you come in, every time you touch something. Wearing gloves, people debate about that. I was doing it for a while. I can tell you I'm wearing gloves for warmth now. But washing your hands, and that means 20 seconds, 2 courses of happy birthday, front and back, and drying them well, and then using a paper towel to turn everything off. That's the first one. The second one is staying home if you're sick, okay? And this is super important because if everybody stays home who's sick. Now, unfortunately, it's not perfect because 40% of people who are shedding SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19 are asymptomatic. But that means 60% are symptomatic. So I'm the mom. I have 5 sons. I'm the mom who's like, come on, I know you don't feel well. Let's have some oatmeal and some Tylenol and let's go to school because I have to go to work. Right. This year, that doesn't fly. This year, everybody gets a pass. If you don't feel well, if your child doesn't feel well, if anybody in the house, is feeling a little unwell, stay home. Don't expose other people. So the first one is wash your hands. The second one is stay home. And I'm blocking on the third one. Let's do the mask, which is the fourth one. And that is wear a mask. Socially distanced. The third one is stay 6 feet apart. Now, 6 feet is an arbitrary number that comes from other respiratory viruses. Outside, there's no question. 6 feet apart is safe. Inside, it is not. There are several documented cases from China that have been well documented of indoor dining where people have had their masks off and have been 6 feet apart and have still gotten infected. So 6 feet apart without a mask outside, but inside, you need to have a mask on. Okay. And there are a variety of things before I go to the mask that seem to affect transmission. One is being outside is very protective. We don't exactly know why. Having a window open is a big help. I mean, all of these ecologically friendly buildings that don't have windows open are not meant for this time of our lives. Right. Opening a window changes the airflow and the viruses drop to the floor because there are these little, they're in little droplets. My husband put fans in the window of his office to increase the airflow. And again, there may not be data on that, but it seems to me that that might be helpful.
When you say they drop to the, wait a minute, you say the droplets drop to the ground. Does that mean that your shoes should be left at the front door when you come in?
No, absolutely not. I mean, you can leave your shoes at the front door because you don't want to get your carpets dirty. There's other things you can bring on your shoes. In the beginning, and this is one of the things where science helps. In the beginning, I was leaving everything outside. Coats, shoes, I was afraid of my groceries. I had a whole protocol for decontamination. That doesn't seem to be a big risk. After you handle anything, wash your hands. These are old, good old public health measures. Okay. But the 6 feet of distance outside is good, but inside, if you're masked, it's probably enough, but unmasked, it's a big problem. The other thing is singing, speaking, all of those things spread the virus. You know, as a friend of mine says, whoever dreamed that singing together would be the most dangerous thing we could do.
Oh,
And it really is, right? But masking turns out to be the best thing we could do to protect ourselves, our children, our families, and our communities. It is one of the great pains of my life that the public health messaging on this was not clear from the beginning. I don't understand why. There's no point in, digging up the past. But my message to you, the reason I'm here is the more people who understand the importance of mask wearing, the better.
Okay.
There are different kinds of masks. The best kind of mask is a N95 mask, which is like the one I have here. Now, this is not a mask thing, but I have a great chain that I got at my local pharmacy, so I can wear it around my neck.
Where do you get that?
Where did I get it? At my local pharmacy.
No, the mask. Where do you get the
the mask?
Yeah.
Yeah, our hardware store sells them.
Oh, okay.
Our hardware store sells them. I can send you the link. You can call Mr. Feldman. I mean, I don't mean to advertise, but he's very nice, and you call him, they have them. They were not available. They were not available for a long time, but now they are available. When those were not available, fabric masks, tight cotton. It turns out, and I have another article to share that I'm going to share after that shows how the tight cotton works differently from the N95, how the fibers.
You know what? In the meantime, Judy and Tal, put Sarah's article in the chat now, because it covers so much of what she said, and people can have it in a format that they can refer to. Okay, so they'll put that in the chat for everyone. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. It was an article I wrote for my shul in the summer. So this is a tightly woven cotton mask. Fits well over my face. It's a good one.
How many layers? Wait. How many layers?
This is 3 layers. 3 layers of, so it's got a heavy cotton layer here, a soft cotton layer here, and then another soft cotton layer in the middle. This is a good one, but people have to see what fits them. Different kinds of masks fit different people. So this one fits me very well. When I worked in the hospital, we would have N95 fit tests. This is before COVID. And you would go, and the biosafety people would fit different ones onto different people. And if you have a larger nose, if you have a big chin, different ones fit differently. This is a clamshell N95. This is, in my mind, the gold standard, because this, instead of going over your ears, goes over your head. So that really, but it's not very comfortable, honestly.
Oh, let me ask you something. If with that N95 clamshell, let's say you ordered it online, are there standards that are people making them and they're not solid? They're not.
Yeah. So there are, this is, again, is a whole complicated discussion. So the difference between an N95 and a KN95 is an N95 is made here in the United States and regulated by the FDA and inspected. KN95s are made in China and less well regulated. This is a KN95. It seems pretty good to me. We got some in the middle of the pandemic that fell apart. They clearly were not adequate. The thing that I want that we talked about before is I don't remember exactly when, but at some point when these became available, I bought these, which I was very happy with because I liked the red gingham. I thought it was cheerful for the summer, and they fit very nicely. But they have this respirator valve. So I've thrown all of them out except this one, which I keep for demonstration purposes. Anything with a respirator valve, you shouldn't be wearing, because the respirator valve is a big hole. And the respirator valves were put on masks that were used for people, for particles, not for germs. And it allows you to breathe out, but if it works properly, it seals when you breathe in. So that means the way masks work is you're protecting others and you're protecting yourself. With this, if it doesn't work perfectly, you're not protecting anybody. Even if it works perfectly, you're not protecting others. So I would strongly recommend against this. Now,
okay, what about washing them? Just a second. What about washing the fabric ones?
Okay, the fabric ones, they should be washed and dried. They don't work when they're wet, so they could be washed by hand with. I use dish soap, but you could use laundry soap. I just find that's just what I would do hand wash with, and then I let them dry. This one, for how long?
No. Like how long can you wear it for? I mean, other than me, who always gets lipstick and makeup all over my mask. From a sanitary, how often do you have to wash?
From a sanitary point of view, I don't want to tell you the wrong thing, but I think washing them on a daily basis, if you're wearing them a lot, And if you sort of add the hours up, if you don't wear them much to, 8 hours of wearing, that's what's
Okay.
recommended. Okay. Now, there is this, which is a face covering, face shield,
Okay.
which is very lovely. But it cannot be worn instead of a mask, but it affords protection in addition to a mask. And there's
Huh.
a lovely study from India, which just to briefly summarize, a study was conducted in primary healthcare workers who were going out and doing testing and tracing in India. And one village was given these in addition to their masks,
Mm-hmm.
and the village wasn't. And this reduced the infection rate in those workers by over, I think it was 25%.
But
So
only if there's a mask underneath it,
only
right?
if there's a mask underneath. It doesn't work instead of a mask. And walking out on the streets here in New York, I'll see people sometimes with just this. It's not enough because think about it. It's air. Air gets underneath. But probably what this does is protect your eyes. There are also studies out of China that demonstrate that wearing glasses, as we are both doing, is protective. In one province, 40% of the population wore glasses, but only 6% of the population who was admitted to the hospital for COVID-19 treatment wore glasses, suggesting, and this isn't proof, but wearing glasses protects your eyes. So
Well, Sarah, there's a reason for that. It's because we who wear glasses, our glasses fog up so much when you put on that darn mask that you can't leave your house because you can't see anything. I
right, I was just going to say, it could be an epiphenomena. Who knows?
Yeah.
Maybe people who wear glasses read more, and that I'm just saying that was reported.
Yeah.
I can tell you in my hospital, people who are actively treating patients are required to wear goggles as well. The data on that is not so great, but it makes intuitive sense. And again, the risk and cost of it are virtually nil. So, wear your mask. But the most important thing, find one that's comfortable or relatively comfortable and wear it.
What about those box of disposable masks? Can I use
Okay,
those?
so those those actually work pretty well. Those have good fibers and they work about as well as this.
All right.
So those work pretty well. So even if it's that, which is definitely more comfortable than this, wear it. They don't work if you don't wear it. And you see people with them on their chin, on their head, hanging from their ear.
Yes, you do.
It has to cover your nose and mouth well. As I say to my family, I'm always saying to my mother, well masked. I love this shape. I just wish it didn't have this valve because you see it covers my nose and my chin very well.
Well, why don't you take the valve out and patch it?
I could do that, I suppose. Probably I'll just get one that is around the same shape. But that's a good idea. People are making them. People are expressing themselves with them, which is terrific. And as I said, I have this chain which has really changed my life because I'm a bit forgetful. I would put it down. Where was it? Now I know. So wear a mask. The problem with eating anywhere is you have to take your mask off. So that's the problem with eating together, particularly inside. And I really would caution people, if you need to, I went and visited my mother yesterday. I hadn't seen her in several weeks and it was raining. So we opened the doors to her. She has a lovely room with a back garden. We opened the doors so the rain didn't come in. It was raining outside. So we had a lot of ventilation, but we sat wearing our masks. We just wore our masks and nobody wants to do that. And
no, they don't.
The thing that I guess is, we're all tired of this. They're calling it COVID fatigue in the press. Everybody's tired of it. I'm tired of it. I called my best friend this morning to say, I'm doing this, frankly, fair amount. And I'm exhausted, not from this. I enjoy this, but I'm not going to see my mother for, United States Thanksgiving because we can't be together and eat dinner. We were able to be together for Sukkot because that was outside. In a sukkah, you're outside and that's okay. But inside really isn't. It's not safe. And it's not as though being tired makes it over. It just doesn't. And so it's going to end. All epidemics end. Whether they peter out on their own, there'll be a vaccine, perhaps like HIV, there'll be a combination of good therapy, good testing. If the testing were good enough and available enough that everybody could test every morning, you could spit on a strip like people who, do sugar testing for their diabetes, and you could then upload a strip that said you were negative. that would also change the pandemic greatly. And that's being developed. All of these things are on the horizon, but they're not here yet. And
What's
so
the
we have
timing?
to,
What's the
so
timing in your estimation?
if I knew, I would be, Cassandra, excuse me, just one second.
Sure.
The vaccines, so this is, vaccines are developed in a very routinized, very strictly prescribed series of clinical tests. There's phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3.
Okay.
Historically, it's been said it takes 10 years to develop a vaccine. The quickest vaccine, these are modern vaccines. We're not talking about Jenner and the cowpox vaccine. These are modern vaccines that have gone through the regulatory process. And the shortest vaccine record is the measles vaccine, which was developed by Maurice Hillman in 1964. And that took 4 years. And that's, when I teach this stuff, not in the pandemic, that's considered a record. Well, we are looking at the development of a vaccine from soup to nuts. It's going to probably take just about a year. And that is record breaking. And people worry because it's not going to be safe enough, but I'm not worried about that. Because a lot of the things that have been done to speed it up have been things that have been done on the taking financial risk. So typically a vaccine is developed, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. Phase 1 is safety, phase 2 is immunogenicity, and only phase 3 is efficacy. It's phase 3 trials that are going on now. And those are huge trials, 30,000, 50,000 people. You've probably read
expensive.
Hugely expensive, billions of dollars. And only when you get a result do you then go ahead and make the vaccine and put it in vials. And making it and putting in vials are two separate processes, because who wants to make a vaccine that didn't work?
Exactly.
But these vaccines, 2 of these vaccines in the United States were made what's called at risk. And that means the United States government in Operation Jet Speed, is that what it's called? Anyway, it's called Operation something, paid to have them made and vialed. So as soon as the result is established, they will be ready for distribution. So that saves a year and a half, or a year in this case. So that's
the chat is blowing up right now. Here's these questions. When Sarah says a year for the vaccine, is that a year from now or a year from the onset of the pandemic?
No, it was a year from when they started. It was a year from when they started.
Another one. When the vaccine is available, is it going to be likely yearly like the flu vaccine or one and done?
Okay, so that's a very good question. And the answer to that is yes and yes. The first vaccine, sorry about that. The first vaccines will almost certainly not be as good as the final vaccine. And that was what happened with polio. So and this is just my own opinion, the first vaccines will probably not be the only ones that we will get. We'll probably get one and then we'll have to get revaccinated. It's not going to be like flu. The reason we have to get a flu vaccine every year is that because the virus mutates so much. This virus doesn't do that. The reason that we'll have to get this vaccine again is because the kind of immunity that gets induced in our bodies isn't sufficiently strong to last. That problem will eventually be solved. So my strong belief is there will eventually be, a vaccine that we won't. There's no vaccine you get only once that I can think of. Even the smallpox vaccine, which is extremely robust, required boosters. So I think that likely we will need to get boosters at some interval, but it will not be every year like flu. But probably like the polio vaccine, for those of us who remember polio, Salk vaccine was developed. Everybody got that. That was the shot. And then a year and a half later, the Sabin vaccine, which is the one that was on the drops or the sugar cube, came along. And that was a stronger and more durable vaccine. So then people got the Sabin vaccine. So I think it's probably something like that.
It occurs to me, Sarah, that, your field you are probably so in demand. I bet you could be working, around the clock. Everybody wants you to weigh in. It's got to be kind of thrilling in a certain way to have a passion about something that suddenly everybody wants to hear just on a personal level.
I will tell you, it is a little bit thrilling and it's certainly overwhelming. As I wrote in the little thing that I did for my synagogue, I've been the geeky science girl my entire life. I love to talk about vaccines, and particularly I began my career in the laboratory of Ralph Steinman, and he was recognized in 2000. Actually, he's from Montreal. He's a Canadian. He was recognized in 2011 with the Nobel Prize for his discovery. And my career really paralleled that discovery. And I had my own laboratory, and then I came back to be the clinical director of his laboratory. Sadly, he died of pancreatic cancer 3 days before he was recognized with the Nobel Prize. So that was a great tragedy for the world, for us. But you know, I think about this stuff. I've loved this stuff. Most people have not been very interested, and now all of a sudden everybody's very interested, which in some ways is very exciting. Mostly it's overwhelmed by an absolute feeling of sort of panic about what's going on, if I think about it. But I do feel like science is going to save us. And as I say, I now, my career, I no longer am actively developing vaccines myself. The IRB, which is our Institutional Ethics Committee, I'm the chair of that, and I direct our clinical training program. And I say to my students who are young physician scientists, if you ever doubted why you were doing what you're doing, this experience has fundamentally changed us, and I feel fortunate to have had the career I've had, and I hope that I'm making a contribution now. But it is kind of amazing.
Sarah, I'm going to ask you to take this last minute that we have and use this as your soapbox. Stare
Okay.
into that camera and tell the 20,000 Momentum mothers and fathers who have, been part of this organization, and all of the scores of others who are going to be watching this in replay. Give us your best practices message moving forward.
My best practices message is hang in there. This is going to end. Science is going to save us. But until that happens, wear your mask. Maintain social distance. Don't go visit your mother for Thanksgiving. We were talking before this about sending our kids. Err on the side of caution. Keep your kid home from school. If you don't feel well, stay home, call your doctor, get tested. Until we have the scientifically developed tools to end the pandemic, we really can bend the curve and save ourselves, our families, and each other by doing these very hard but doable old-fashioned things.
Sarah, you are a blessing and a gift.
You. Thank you. You're very kind.
Honestly, I know I speak for all of us in Momentum Land and everyone watching this to thank you and to wish you strength and continued clarity to do the work that you do that is helping so many of us.
Well, thank you very much. I'm honored to be able to participate, and I wish you and your families all, well, good health, if we'll make it through together.
Amen.
Amen. Amen. All right.
So this conversation has been incredibly helpful, and there's been a lot of questions and comments that, of course, I couldn't get to, and I apologize. So I do hope you'll join us again in the future because,
I'm here.
Like this. Yay. Okay, so to the rest of us in Momentum Land, be sure to join us on November 4th because divorce and family mediator Jody Commons is returning, and she's got more strategies for ensuring healthy communication with the people we love, and heaven knows we're going to need it. She's going to explore different ways to help us connect with our partners, our kids, our parents, extended family, as well as verbal and nonverbal cues that greatly impact our closest relationships. So to register for any of these upcoming booths, you just click that link above me right now or visit momentumunlimited.org. And please don't forget to respond to the poll that's coming up on your screens in just a minute after our short video. But for me, Adrienne Gold Davis, and all of us at Momentum, remember that as we learn and grow together, the best practices we learned today protect ourselves, protect others, and will help to heal the world. See you soon.